when we travel, we fly. We do something. You're not going to realize. So you both so much for spirit. Why not some people? I would seriously yeah. And maybe it's something else. On the back side of that? Maybe bathhouse and stuff like that. You're going to be surprised at things that you just take for granted right there. Right. Except for you have to buy them. Yeah, but you can take us to 96 and then portion of it. But that's how you take
I use my handy dandy thing here.
You know, I am not experienced. I'm in so, I know.
It does give some, looks like some
Andrew, did you know how full your house is?
yes. And you
someplace in the West Side that you need to come home.
You said no. Yeah.
Well, I'm not.
And that's basically the, magic line take plan. This person is going to
I heard they have it on the wrong side.
kids who even still don't. So they'd be happy with the magic
Yeah, I think it's in the registration. Like they're out. Okay, well then I would show the booking cost. Yeah, as a registrar.
I don't know. Did you see the big screen in the cafeteria?
That I was on.
It was fake. Yeah.
Like it's in the How do you know if this is on? I think it's on.
They were like, we're watching her.
So they I've had kids say,
He's got groups today.
You might be okay.
I'm good. How are you doing? You were even on No? No, but you like that? Or you need something? Right. For me, it's I just put that out. Oh, okay. I saw it.
I don't know. I just saw this pull the zero thing out there.
It is caramel, peanut, and almond nougat. White and fudge. Yeah, I gave my little present every day when I was there.
Before we start, I'm going to ask 2 assessment questions. There is no wrong answer. So take the pressure off of you. First of all, how many are familiar with ACEs, adverse childhood experiences? Okay, that's good. I've heard of it. That works. Good. Yeah. Raise your hand if you're a counselor. Teacher? Yeah! I love that. Administrator? Great. Okay. I love that there's so many teachers.
There's a lot of teachers.
I mean, yes, I knew you would be engaged, but I love that you're embracing the social emotional trauma stuff. Okay. We have 2 minutes. We'll wait.
Knowing you though, I would think she was trying to throw it away.
Okay. This too, we're going to start, but I wanted to start with this quote I found on none other than Twitter. Can I find it? I'll look for it when she's talking and read it there. I don't want to take it for time. All right. First of all, thank you so much for coming. I appreciate that. You must have been listening to someone some point in the day because you knew we had a repeat session here at 2 o'clock. So either you were on the app, you got turned away earlier, sorry about that, or you talked to a friend. I don't know. But I'm glad you're here. And if we didn't get you in earlier, I apologize for that, but I'm glad you're back. We're going to talk today about trauma-informed practices, and so what we're going to do is we're going to lay the foundation for what is trauma, and then we're going to talk through how does that apply to schools. I am Kristen Ashley, Executive Director of Counseling. This is?
I'm Elizabeth Suddeth. I'm the Director of Prevention Services.
So what we like to say is that we are a team because what we know is that there's a lot of traumatic things going on for kids, and there is also just a lot of influence around our kids that we don't have control over. They go home to someone every night, and they live in a community that we don't control. But she works in prevention, and she is helping prevent negative outcomes to the other things around kids. I am the intervention. So we have prevention and intervention. I focus on, some bad things have happened, and we're getting unhealthy outcomes. What can we do now? So we're kind of at different levels in the sense of how we approach things. Her brain, Elizabeth's brain, is so focused on like the whole world around the kid. It's really amazing. And I think a lot more individually and like what's going on with that kid. Yes, the little things that are going around the kid, but she thinks about community and just bigger, and it's great, and I love having her. When I say these words, what comes to mind? Trauma.
Trouble.
Something bad, trouble, abuse. Nothing good, right? Trauma-informed or trauma-sensitive. Okay.
Aware.
Aware? Trauma-informed instruction? What's that mean?
How to help
how to help, how to talk to them.
Being flexible.
So all of these things work together. We're going to talk about what is trauma. We're going to understand what it means to be trauma-informed, and we're actually going to talk about how you deliver trauma-informed instruction. So what is trauma? Well, it technically can be anything that changes the brain's development. Our brains are supposed to develop in a certain way, fully developed by 25. We continue to get more information input to our brain, but we know that when the brain has been altered, something odd has happened, that can be a trauma. You can have a really healthy life and experience a car wreck, and that fear, that scare, that adrenaline, everything that's going on can change the development of the brain just like that. Although we do know more common examples: abuse, assault, natural disaster, and death of other people around them. But really we know anything can lead to trauma. Okay, so here's the ACEs study. This is what I was asking about. This is not the only type of trauma. We're going to talk about other trauma. But the Adverse Childhood Experience study was done in San Diego in 1985. Dr. Vince Felitti, I'm not sure. I've heard it said both ways. I don't know. He noticed that patients were losing a drastic amount of weight. He was very happy about that. They were successful, but they would go home, leave his care, come back, all the weight's been put back on. And he's going, I don't understand. My medical interventions should be working. How many times have we done that in education? They told me how to teach a kid to read, and they're not reading. What is going on? Happens, right? Through further interviews, he found out that this is the one that really came to light for him. A client disclosed she had been raped earlier in life, and the weight helped her cope. To be overweight was to be overlooked, and that's the way I needed to be, to stay safe. How many times have you heard or understood a kid is fleeing from your classroom, whether literally or mentally, because that's how they stayed safe? And you're going, oh my gosh, they're running away, that is not safe. Their brain says that's safe. So, Dr. Felitti and the CDC started to work together to develop the 10 adverse childhood experiences. I have heard that they are doing research to add more to this, because what you'll notice on here is violence is not on here, like community violence or some other things. So anyway, for now they have 10. We have abuse, physical, emotional, or sexual. What I like to point out with this one, we see these a lot more, right? We see the physical abuse, we can see the response of emotional. A lot of these are silent. And we don't know sexual abuse, but we know our statistics: 1 in 4 females by age 18 will be a victim of a sexual crime, sexual abuse. 1 in 6 boys. So neglect, physical neglect, emotional neglect. And then we have our household dysfunctions. Parents with a mental illness, usually untreated. Mother treated violently, so domestic violence, domestic abuse. Divorce. Think of our divorce rate. How many kids are walking around with at least an A score of 1? Substance abuse and incarceration. When we usually deliver this message, you start to see faces kind of flat, because I know some of you in your chairs right now are calculating your A score. And that's okay. That's good to be self-aware, but that can be triggering. So we highly encourage you to always take care of yourself when you start to explore trauma stuff. It can get you in a pretty scary place. Maybe some things you hadn't thought about. Maybe you're here and it's hard for you to think about those kids. You might be at an A score of 1. Maybe you gave your kid an A score of 1. Gave your kid. We opened this up when I was in Norman Public Schools, and we started talking about ACEs, and we had a teacher say, I'm sitting there watching this and going, I've given my kid an A score of 3. Because she had struggled with mental illness for years, she had been through divorce, and she was abused by her husband. The heaviness of that for her was really hard to then turn that around and go, how do I help my kids? So take care of yourself, do what you need to do, but no, we're all humans. We're not working with robots, and we're not robots. So as we explore these things, it's okay to feel a little raw. We always like to end with self-care. We've yet to be able to get to self-care in any of our presentations, because there's so much content, but we have included the self-care tips in your PowerPoint presentation on the app. So what we know is there's a strong correlation with a higher ACE score and these following things: social, emotional, and cognitive impairment, which is what you probably see in your classroom all the time. And there's also the health risk behaviors, smoking, drinking, heart disease, diabetes, some other things, disease, disability, social problems, and then also, unfortunately, early death. Those with an ACE score of 3 or higher are considered at risk for all of these things. Now, I understand some of these things are adult issues. We don't have control over that, but we do have a lot of opportunity to be the resilient factor for these kids in here, so that's why we talk about that. But we do know that kids who are experiencing an ACE score of 3 or higher are probably being raised by parents who also have an ACE score of 3 or higher. So we know that our kids' parents are experiencing these things as well. This statistic, I can't remember where we got this one. So you may sometimes see different numbers. 33% of Oklahomans have an ACE score. This is 45.5 of Oklahoma children have an ACE score of 3 or higher. I'm sure that's not shocking. We just talked about divorce, domestic violence, some other things, mental illness. We're going to watch this video. This is Dr. Nadine Burke-Harris. We're not going to watch the whole video. It's about 15 minutes, I believe. I would highly encourage you to go back and watch it. It's a fabulous TED Talk, but she explains the brain in a way that we just can't because we are not doctors. So we're going to let her explain it to us.
Let's suppose that you're writing a really important email to a colleague.
Your response center. So there are real neurologic reasons why folks exposed to high doses of adversity are more likely to engage in high-risk behavior, and that's important to know. But it turns out that even if you don't engage in any high-risk behavior, you're still more likely to develop heart disease or cancer. The reason for this has to do with the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, the brain's and body's stress response system that governs our fight or flight response. How does it work? Well, imagine you're walking in the forest and you see a bear. Immediately, your hypothalamus sends a signal to your pituitary, which sends a signal to your adrenal gland that says, release stress hormones, adrenaline, cortisol. And so your heart starts to pound, your pupils dilate, your airways open up, and you are ready to either fight that bear or run from the bear. And that is wonderful if you're in a forest and there's a bear. But the problem is what happens when the bear comes home every night. And this system is activated over and over and over again. And it goes from being adaptive or life-saving to maladaptive or health-damaging. Children are especially sensitive to this repeated stress activation because their brains and bodies are just developing. High doses of adversity not only affect brain structure and function, they affect the developing immune system, developing hormonal systems, and even the way our DNA is read and transcribed. So for me, this information threw my old training out the window.
Don't you love the way she explains that? Like, I swear she wasn't a doctor at first because she could explain it so easy. Like when she talks about fighting the bear. When she said, what if the bear comes home every night? Like, I just sunk the first time I heard that. I thought, how terrifying must that be for kids?
Yeah, so we let her say words like hypothalamic
Exactly.
pituitary axis.
Right.
Okay, so what she talked about, fighting the bear, this definitely translates into the classroom. So think about some of the students that maybe have a little bit more disruptions than the others, or maybe some that are a little bit more withdrawn. So maybe in the classroom, they are still fighting the feeling that the bear gives them, or knowing that they're going to go home and the bear is there. So as educators, what we want to promote the most is making your classroom as bear-free as possible. So making your classroom the safest place for that child who goes home and experiences those bears. Talking is that I'm so used to tuning things out that I didn't even realize. Yes, so learning occurs when a student feels safe. So if they don't have that feeling of all of that cortisol rising up in their body, then they're going to start learning. And we'll talk a little bit about the brain on the next slide and kind of how that interacts with the way that they are learning. But that's what we want to create in classrooms. So looking around this classroom, how cute it's decorated, it just feels like someplace that you want to be sitting. So think about your classroom too. And I mean, it does not have to be beach themed. I'm not telling you to go buy Christmas lights and palm trees and stuff. But think about your classroom. Is it warm and inviting? Is it someplace that students can feel safe in? I was listening to somebody talking about going to therapy, and their life was really, really chaotic all around them. And one of the suggestions was redoing her bedroom to make it more beautiful and more organized. And so when she is in that environment, all of the chaos around feels a little bit more controlled because it's in a setting that's organized and is aesthetically pleasing too. So that's where classrooms can come in. So when the brain is overwhelmed with cortisol, it cannot take on any new knowledge or any problem solving. That might trigger something like, oh, that's why there's no problem solving going on. So if they are feeling all of those rushes of emotions, a student actually cannot make good choices. So a lot of times we say, make better choices, or you made a bad choice. And sometimes it's that their body isn't allowing them to make any choices. And it's kind of just out of their control at that point. And then fight, flight, or freeze. So we've all heard of fight or flight. Freeze is one that isn't always added in, but I love that it is here. So that fight, flight, or freeze is your body's natural response to something that's going on. So what this makes me think of is that feeling that I remember. So like being little, me and my brother loved to hide around like corners or stuff and like jump out at each other. So he would do it all the time to me. And so flight, sometimes I would run away screaming, or a lot of times I would just freeze. And that was just my initial response. And I did it to him one time, and I jumped out, and I realized his response was fight. I never did it again. But it's really just that body's like natural response of, okay, something's coming at me, what do I do? So in those situations, it's usually pretty quick. So for people who can self-regulate, you kind of come out of that fight, flight, or freeze pretty quickly. For some of those students, you can kind of get that feeling, when you're really scared or startled, they're feeling that all the time. And it's really, they're just running off of those basic emotions of what am I going to do. So here is some basic parts to the brain. So the neocortex is that higher order thinking. So this is where learning is taking place. When the students are in their upper level brain, this neocortex, they are learning. This is where their personality is. This is where problem solving is taking place. This is where we have the students in that zone that they don't need that extra support, right? So if something happens and those cortisol levels raise, those stress hormones raise, or when we're in that fight, flight, or freeze, you actually go down into this limbic brain. And that's when you're just running off of emotions, and your body is just running off of a survival mode. So it's a very primitive version of the brain. This part is a little bit harder. Well, it is very hard for people to control. And then down into the brainstem is really where you're in that survival. I am in survival mode right now. That's kind of where some of those most traumatic events happen. And you think back and you're like, wow, I don't even remember making my body do all of those things. I don't even really remember all of that. That's where you're operating in your brainstem. So a lot of times for these students sitting in class, if they are feeling triggered by something, they're down in this limbic brain. And so something that we read today in the book that we will reference a lot and give you, show you, not give it to you, but show you it as a resource at the end, is talking about how music is a really good way to get out of that limbic brain. So even playing a little bit of music sometimes in the classroom, it can reset that and get back up into the neocortex.
And there are other things that do that, obviously. We just went to the Trauma Informed Conference in St. Louis, and we walked in, they had water, they had snacks, they had some music going, we did an activity where we stood up and did something with our bodies and something like that, and then later she was like, all of those things help you regulate. And she talked about the whole time, and she had the best snacks, so she had really researched her regulation skills, like ice cream bars, like the giant ice cream bars, Snickers and stuff.
I need to start doing that.
I know, we'll bring those to you next time. But it was very interesting, and you know the research has to be true, and I happened to be traveling the other day at the Atlanta airport when it got shut down, and people are mass chaos, right? Delta starts just wheeling out bottles of water and food and everything, and I was like, there is a science to this regulation because they are terrified of us. So, anyway, go ahead.
Okay, so going back to learning in the brain chemistry, so how learning is taking place depending on what level of the brain students are in. So in this red zone, this is more of like the brainstem zone. This is their fight or flight response. This is when they're feeling anxiety or overwhelmed. I am sorry that I keep pausing. Talking today is kind of making it a little harder right now. So thinking is rigid or chaotic. So there's no like order to thinking. It's kind of all over the place. And if you think about your students who maybe have like their meltdowns or something, it seems very chaotic and rigid, right? All over the place. So in this red zone, absolutely no new learning can take place whatsoever. So down in this blue zone, this is going to be more of the withdrawn student. So maybe the student who sleeps all day or who is just really withdrawn, acts like they are not even sitting in the room. Nothing really gets their attention. A lot of times this is linked with depression. And so they're isolated, shut down, numb, and no new learning can take place here either. Okay, so really what we want is for students to be in this green zone. So this is when they are in that higher level thinking, that higher level brain. They can feel a full range of emotions. And anger is still an emotion, so they might still feel that anger about something that's happening, but they are able to self-regulate and kind of take themselves back out of that place. And here in this green zone is when new learning can take place. So ideally, we want 100% of students to be in this green zone, but we definitely know that that is not always possible, right? So even if you have students in this red zone or blue zone, just doing everything that you can as an educator to support that safe space to have that green zone. So we're not saying that if you don't have everybody in that green zone, then you're failing at Trauma Informed, because that is definitely not the case at all. So just doing these practices that you can walk away with to create a little bit more of a safer place to get more students into that green zone.
Okay, so if you follow me on Twitter, know me at all, ever heard of me, you know I'm absolutely obsessed with Brené Brown, and every time you ever see me, I will talk about her. This is a video. Have you seen the empathy video from Brené Brown?
What name are you saying?
Brené, like Renee, but with a B. Brené Brown. She's a professor at University of Houston. She is a researcher on shame and vulnerability. Okay, so most people haven't seen this. Good. We're going to show you this video on empathy, because what we want to do is, we basically just said, trauma is bad. We hate trauma. It's terrible. It stinks. But there's hope, right? We know that there's resilience out there and that we are the ones that can help be that resilient factor, which leads to hope. So this kind of leads into the application, but she does a beautiful job of explaining where we start.
So what is empathy, and why is it very different than sympathy? Empathy fuels connection. Sympathy drives disconnection. Empathy, it's very interesting. Teresa Wiseman is a nursing scholar who studied professions, very diverse professions where empathy is relevant, and came up with 4 qualities of empathy. Perspective taking, the ability to take the perspective of another person or recognize their perspective as their truth. Staying out of judgment, not easy when you enjoy it as much as most of us do. Recognizing emotion in other people and then communicating that. Empathy is feeling with people. And to me, I always think of empathy as this kind of sacred space when someone's kind of in a deep hole and they shout out from the bottom and they say, I'm stuck, it's dark, I'm overwhelmed. And then we look and we say, hey, you climb down. I know what it's like down here, and you're not alone. Sympathy is, ooh, it's bad, no, you want a sandwich? Empathy is a choice, and it's a vulnerable choice, because in order to connect with you, I have to connect with something in myself that knows that feeling. Rarely, if ever, does an empathic response begin with at least. And we do it all the time, because you know what? Someone just shared something with us that's incredibly painful, and we're trying to silver lining it. I don't think that's a verb, but I'm using it as one. We're trying to put the silver lining around it. So, I had a miscarriage. At least you know you can get pregnant. I think my marriage is falling apart. At least you have a marriage. John's getting kicked out of school. At least Sarah is an A student. But one of the things we do sometimes in the face of very difficult conversations is we try to make things better. If I share something with you that's very difficult, I'd rather you say, I don't even know what to say right now, I'm just so glad you told me. Because the truth is, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection.
You're in love, aren't you? I knew it.
Send an emoji. Okay, yeah.
Emoji. First time I watched this, I was like, I'm an at-leaster.
Oh, I'm an at-leaster for sure. Like, even to my own children, I have an 8-year-old and a 6-year-old. And, my son comes home and he's like, Kircher wouldn't play with me at recess. And I'm like, at least Caskey did, right? And he's like, Mom. I'm like, I know, I was supposed to connect, sorry. I've been connecting all day. Time for you. Unfortunately, that happens sometimes. So, the idea is you're not going to have the answers for all of your kids, and you're not going to solve all of their problems. You just need to connect with them. And that at least is really important. And sometimes we don't know what kids need. My husband's a principal at a middle school, and he said he is using this at work, but he's brought it home. I'm semi-okay with that. But he starts saying, do you need me to just listen, or do you need me to help you with something? Sometimes we need to say that in a kid version, right? Do you just need me to listen right now? Do you need help with this? And that works through a connection. Getting rid of our at least would be really important too. We don't have to agree with everything a kid did. So the position I just came out of was student advocacy coordinator at Norman High School, and I was basically the advocate for bullying, harassment, and sexual assault. Do I agree with every behavior that these kids made before the violence was happening to them? No. But the violence didn't happen to them because of their behavior, so I'm not going to say, well, at least you didn't get this to happen to you, or at least the bullying wasn't physical, right? No. I just had to connect with those kids and help them find their voice and advocate for them. So we know resilience trumps ACEs. Parents, teachers, and caregivers can help children. We need to gain an understanding of ACEs. You've done that. We did that this morning. We did that this afternoon. You continue to gain understanding of ACEs. We will keep doing that for people. Create environments where children feel safe emotionally and physically. Helping children identify feelings and manage emotions, and creating a safe physical and emotional environment in home, school, and neighborhoods. I know you don't have control over their neighborhood, and I know you don't have control over their home. However, I do fully believe it's not about control, and it's about modeling, and it's about connection that I believe could help your community and could help your neighborhoods. Not control. I know recently some person put out the word control. Teachers have control over all kids. And the social media wildfire, I bet he regrets ever saying that. I'm not going to say who it was. So, ask your friend. But I will also say, sometimes this is hard to understand. If you are a person, bless you if this is you, who has no trauma in your background, in your childhood or your adult life, congratulations, that is awesome. But I will say sometimes it's hard to understand your kids. And I will meet you there, and I will understand you fully because that was me, and I will be fully honest about that. I'm a marriage and family therapist. I'm alternatively certified as school counselor. For several years, I'm practicing. I'm not understanding why clients aren't changing. I'm providing the interventions. Why aren't you working? Your end of the deal, why aren't you fixed, right? Got out of that because people weren't fixing themselves. Unfortunately, it happened to be that I had to experience trauma to understand it. I will say my ACE score, my childhood experience, I had an ACE score of maybe 0.5. The diagnosis on a parent might be still out. But I had a great childhood. I didn't have the perfect childhood, but I had a great childhood. In high school, I did have a friend die in a car accident, and that was traumatic. But again, I had great support systems. I had resilience in my life, so I did okay. But it wasn't until I was 30 when I had the most traumatic event happen to me, and I can publicly speak about it because the whole world knows about my trauma. If you've been to a crisis training for any of our OSSI crisis trainings and all that, I was the counselor at Plaza Towers Elementary in May 2013. And so I survived the tornado, but 7 of my students did not. And I can talk about my trauma. Number 1, a lot of good therapy. And number 2, because it is public and it's not necessarily all about my own ACE score and things like that. But I finally understood my kids who experienced trauma. I was sitting in a presentation by a national speaker who had come to Oklahoma. She was from the Northeast. She came to Oklahoma. I think she was trying to connect with us. I really do, because she's a social worker, so I think she kind of gets it. She decided to say, crisis and suicide is kind of like a tornado, and she had a rotating tornado up on the screen. So, of course, my brain has flipped. I'm now in survival mode. I am absolutely flipping out, but I'm a professional, y'all. I have a master's degree. I'm a counselor. I should know how to handle this, but I don't. I'm sitting there feeling so isolated in that classroom with all of these administrators and professionals around me, and I am ready to either run out of the room, flee. I'm ready to yell at her, to knock down her screen, to punch. She just left it there for 5 minutes, and I'm like, oh my gosh. I was able to use my coping skills and play with my emojis, and I got into a better place, and I colored, and I used my fidgets, and I made it out. It took me a good 5 to 10 minutes to probably make it out and to hear the rest of her presentation. That day, I understood my kids. And I knew from that point on, I could never stop talking about this. I found that quote I wanted to talk about because it's on Twitter, so it's real. This person said, they're quoting someone else, "If you know what you know and see what you see and do nothing about it, you are negligent." And this is by Sherry Gann. I don't know who you are, but that's pretty good. And I like it. And once you know what kids are experiencing and you see it in your classroom, we have to address it. We can't look the other way. So we know that same idea of saying teachers have everything under the control. Another person on social media put out something about good teachers do this, and that was another wildfire. I swear, if people just watch their tweets, our life would be a lot better. Or consult. We have talked about this. Before you tweet, consult with friends.
Yeah.
Maybe some
appropriate rhetoric.
That too. I just really would appreciate that. So anyway, we don't say good and bad classrooms. We don't say good or bad teachers. We say safe, less safe, healthy, less healthy, things like that. We know that a safe classroom is a class that's more collaborative. It's hearing from kids and knowing what's good for them, and then also hearing from you. It's going back and forth. It's not so authoritative. You will do this because I said so. I've said that to my children probably last week, right? That's not healthy for a trauma-informed classroom. We need to use fewer words, and we need to listen more. We need to hear from our kids about what they need. Elizabeth will talk a little bit more about that. She has some great tips on how to engage kids' opinion. The flexibility. We will talk about boundaries and expectations. We're not saying it's a free-for-all. Let them do whatever they want, because we also know kids in trauma are used to that, and that's really hard for them too. But we need to have flexibility. yes, I understand that they should drop their assignment in that one tray that you told them to do on the first day of school, but the bottom line is they will not always do that, and there needs to be flexible options. I'm not going to tell you what the other option should be. I'm just saying that's one example. Being calm as much as possible. There's this little activity that I love, and I tried yesterday. It's reaction versus responding, and I don't think it went well, so I'm not going to have you guys do it. But think about the difference in reaction and response. Reaction is usually very, right? That's the visual of it. You know, I don't always have words. Sometimes I just have, but the response usually to people is more opening. Like, what's going on for you? Tell me more. Tell me more is the best thing you can ever say to a kid. As a counselor, I use that every day. That's how I coach people into kids who are experiencing suicide ideations. Don't lead them in a certain direction. You're not thinking about suicide, are you? That's leading. Tell me more about what's going on. Tell me more about those thoughts. Tell me more about the feelings. Tell me more about your plans. Tell me more is great. That is a calm statement, and that really gives them direction and pace of the conversation so you can assess what's going on. The next one, try not to be so sensitive and personalize this. Because what you do when you personalize it, you shame yourself. Do you know the difference in shame and guilt? I didn't until a couple years ago because Brene Brown. Shame. I'm such a hands person that I don't always like the clicker. Shame, guilt. Shame says, I am bad. Guilt says, I did bad. So, I'm not a mistake, I made a mistake. We cannot stay in shame. And we teachers sometimes, we counselors, we administrators, we shame ourselves because we personalize this. I'm failing. That's okay. You might be a little bit at some things, but I am not a failure. We got to think about how we're sending ourselves messages, and because we actually will send other people those messages too, not on purpose. Another Brene Brown thing that she says is talk to yourself like you would talk to your own children. And that's something we can encourage kids on. The other day, you know, AP scores were coming out, and I saw something on social media where a student said, I only made this on an AP score, I'm a failure at life. I'm like, oh, no. Where did you get that message, and we need to stop? I'm not saying a teacher gave it, but I'm saying our kids are hearing this message at home and other places, social media, all kinds of stuff. So modeling that self-regulation and that self-care. Take care of yourself. Know your boundaries. Elizabeth will talk more about that specifically. So our trauma cycle, we're not always in control of the kids' trauma. In fact, we're almost never in control of their trauma. But that will produce psychological damage and social emotional damage. But this is where we come in. They're starting to respond, and you see behavior problems. It's when we decide what punishment they get, we then send them back into trauma. Because it doesn't stop until we stop it with our resilience. We can continue to re-traumatize kids a million times, and we're not helping us, and we're not helping them. I'm not saying you can't ever give a kid a consequence. We're going to expand on that, but I really like when district leaders come to this session too, because you as teachers need to know that your leadership understands this just as much as you do, that your kids need restorative justice. They need restorative practices. They don't need to be kicked out of your class, which then is kicked out of the school, which is then sent back to the place where the A score is happening, or the other trauma is happening, or whatever. I'm not saying I have all the answers, but I do know that what we have been doing is not necessarily working, and we have to think more about what we can do differently. This is a really good book, and it'll be up here if you want to take a picture of it later. The Trauma-Informed School by Heather Forbes and Jim Sporleader. It's a step-by-step implementation guide for administrators and school personnel. What's great about this is we found it on Amazon for like $50-some or something. But it can be for administrators or just classroom teachers. Like, this can just be your classroom, but ideally it would be your whole school, right? Even more ideally your whole district, but we'll work on that. So it goes through all of this stuff. Like in here, it does talk about in-school suspension and how you do that. Having an in-school suspension person who is working on restorative justice, on character development, social emotional learning, they're using that opportunity to grow and develop, not sleep. Creating a calm room. That was one thing I did at Norman High. I made an environment. I wrote a local grant to get calm down kits. I used to be in elementary, so I've got some corny stuff. Calm down kit for my high school kids, and I could place them in the library, my office, and some other teacher areas where kids, but it would be tactile stuff. It would be like a Zen garden, squeeze things, just normal stuff like that. But she has in the back very practical things to do. I think it's like 26 or 36, no, more. Oh, whoa, look at her, 50-some. 53 strategies for implementing trauma-informed practices. So a perspective shift. These are absolutely things I've heard was probably in the last 12 to 18 months out of teacher, administrator, or counselor mouths. Old, but we need to go to the new. And I'm going to say these the way I've heard them. He is so defiant. Trauma-informed says he's really lacking in social skills. She is choosing this behavior. She is reacting with adrenaline and survival skills. Do you feel the difference in how we talk about our kids? What is wrong with him? What happened to him? I don't need to call home. They are not going to help me. Calling home might give me more insight about what my kid's dealing with. I will not tolerate disrespect in my classroom. You guys have never heard that, I'm sure. How can I help him learn respect? Trauma-informed is not another thing to add to your classroom. It is a perspective shift. It is a mindset, and it's moving away from, unfortunately, a lot of judgment about what kids should have been, and it moves into how do I get kids to be the successful people that I know they're capable of being. So you're not going to walk away with a toolkit today. You might buy this and get some strategies, but this is what you have to work on. This is a really good video. We're not going to show it to you. It is. We just don't have time. We never have enough time. So social emotional learning. I think it was on Ed Week something. It's about a high school, I want to say in Nevada, that made social emotional learning a priority in their school, and they saw great outcomes. So it's just really good. But if you need it, we can send you the link.
I'll stand over here so you can see. Okay, so yeah, definitely that last one, and I won't tolerate disrespect. That was 100% me when I very first started teaching. I was young, going into a high school classroom, and I was told these kids are going to walk all over you if you don't go in and show dominance. And me going in, I'm not going to tolerate disrespect. That opened the floodgate to disrespect. So even reframing that mind of maybe these students just need to be taught these things. A quote that I have heard in the last couple of weeks that have really just been ringing true to me is, challenging kids are only challenging because they've never been taught how not to be challenging. So some of those skills that maybe they feel so challenging on, ask yourself, have they ever been taught this skill? Have they ever been taught how to show respect? Also something we probably won't have time to get to, but I do want to make sure I mention the not tolerating disrespect. I realized was a really big thing is because being disrespected was a huge trigger to my trauma. So before you walk into a classroom, you have to dig deep. What is my trauma? What are my triggers? And what hard hat am I going to walk in? I heard that analogy before being used, but how am I going to walk in to my classroom with a protection against that trigger to my trauma? Because a lot of times, students can trigger those traumas in our life, and then we react in a very non-trauma informed way. Just because we are put back in, like she was talking about, we are being put back into that limbic brain. So think about, how do you know when you are being triggered in the classroom? And how can you protect yourself? How can you put up those boundaries around that? Okay, so still thinking about that perspective shifting. So it is a complete paradigm shift. So I know before I went through all this trauma-informed training, I was, yes, student does something wrong, there's a punishment, right? That is the way we grew up. That is the way school has always been. That's the way that I've seen it. So the student who is screaming because they can't have 5 extra minutes or have to give up the iPad, there needs to be a punishment for that. It was actually a scenario when I very first started working with a group of first graders. I had a student that I would walk into the building. I did behavior interventions. I knew what scream was his because he was always screaming. And I would walk in and be like, yep, that's him. And almost every single day it was over him handing back the iPad. So really I started talking to him a little bit more. And a couple of weeks earlier, he had about 5 of his cousins move into this 1-bedroom apartment with him, and they all take his tablet all the time. So he never gets tablet time. So when he had to give that iPad back in class, it was so scary to him, he didn't know if he was ever going to see it again. But before, the only thing that ever happened was punishment. So you're not giving the iPad back, you're throwing a book across the room, leave. Your punishment, you were sitting out from recess. You're not seeing your friends. So really, when I came in me and the teacher started working together about, why was this going on? I started thinking, what if we hear every student's reason beyond, or why, they're acting like that? And you don't have to know the student's trauma. You don't have to know what's going on in their life. But just kind of acknowledging that there's probably something deeper there. And I guarantee if you probably knew the deeper story, you wouldn't react in the way that you do. So just thinking that everybody has a deeper reason. So that's shifting a school or a classroom from a punitive classroom, so just based on punishment, to a trauma-informed classroom. So if we are only focusing on punishment to change behavior, then we're losing the battle. Because one, we either have students who, I don't care, send me to the principal's office. Or we have the students who are, I'm going to outlast you. You can punish me all you want, I will outlast you. So we need, if that's not working, then let's switch. So instead of verbally reprimanding, switching to finding out what's going on. Like I said, tell me more, what's going on. A student is, having a meltdown in the classroom. Tell me what's going on. Punitive, losing recess, like I said. So taking away recess time, especially in our elementary kids, they need to get that energy out, right? The best way to get that energy out is at recess. So maybe looking for some of those other consequences. And sitting on a sidewalk during recess is really not teaching new behaviors, right? They're just building up that energy even more for the classroom. So no specials. I've seen this. You have to sit out music today. So this is another one that you can work with, your music teachers. You can work with PE. You can work with so many different people across the building to start implementing trauma-informed practices in those places also. So I remember when I was in elementary school, my music teacher is really the one who taught us all of this stuff. She taught me what different learning styles were. She taught me that if I was feeling really stressed out, that if I started stretching from side to side, that it would help my brain connect right brain to left brain. So really this stuff can happen in specials too. So seclusion from other kids. Go out into the hallway. I'm not going to deal with you right now. Go out in the hallway. Go to the principal's office. So I'm not saying there's not times that you don't need to get a kid out of a room, because I have definitely seen those times when a kid had a stapler in his hand going to another kid, right? There's times that a child does need to be out of the room, but it depends on how you do it and doing it before we get to the point of the huge blow up. So if you notice that a kid that you need to give a little bit more support to is maybe getting a little antsy, maybe getting a little restless, maybe you have a special pass for them. You say, you know what, I really need this paper taken to the office. So what that does, gives that student time to get up, get some of that energy out, feel like they are given a task and a job, and they feel important in the classroom. They feel like they belong in the classroom. Walk down to the principal's office, the principal knows exactly what this pass is, and then by the time they come back, maybe they've had some time to regulate again. So that's not telling the student, you are not welcome in this room, you need to leave, you're not a part of this family, because that feels rejection. That feels like rejection. They still feel like they are included. And then suspension, like we talked about. Oh, we're getting really close to time. I know. So consequences should always teach new patterns of behavior. So at the end of the day, just ask yourself, are the consequences that I am giving out in my class, are they teaching new patterns of behavior, or are they just reinforcing that trauma? Because so many studies have shown that punitive-only measures are re-traumatizing to those students. Okay, I will not keep you over. So if you want to keep going through these slides, there is still some good information about what you can do in the classroom to create safety, to give the students choices, and how to maintain high expectations. And maintaining high expectations for all of your students. So not just the A students or not just the students who are involved in everything, but maintain those high expectations for all of your students. And then there's some stuff on goal setting.
We highly encourage goal setting for social emotional growth as well. We know that you have to be focused on benchmarks and report cards and all of that too, but sitting down with parents and students at the beginning of the year and really looking at some social emotional goals they can work on helps you assess that throughout the year and meet with them at parent-teacher conferences or readdress when things are not going well. And I even joked this morning, but I mean, why not? If with a high school kid, maybe all they can come up with is a social goal. Hey, I want to, get a girlfriend this year. All right, let them write it and work with them on it and build that connection. And maybe in 2 weeks you ask them, how's that going? You taking a girl out yet? Whatever. But connect with these kids, but find out emotionally where they need to grow.
I even had a teacher come up to me after our trauma session this morning and say at the beginning of the year she sends home on the first day of school with all of her students a little thing for the parents to fill out. Tell the students that it's homework, the parents fill it out, tell me about your child. And she said the information that she gets back on that is invaluable. So just letting the parents tell you, give you that blueprint ahead of time. What can I expect with your child? And what are some goals that we have together? Wish we could expand on that a little bit more, but I don't want to keep you too long. But please look through this presentation.
Question? I had one of my kids, one of their teachers did that, and it's good for the parent too, because then you feel like they want to know about my kid.
Yes. And that is the biggest piece that I wish we could have got to as well. Parents want to feel like you are working together and not like they're working against you. So those parent conferences, not just this kid is doing wrong, and it feels really almost attacking at times. So working together with those parents to figure out solutions.
Yeah, and we, as much as you need to leave, we have to leave too because we have to get on the road to Bartlesville. But we do want to say we are here to help. Please use us. I don't care if you're not a counselor. Use us, see what we can do. You're welcome to follow either of us on Twitter. They are just our regular accounts. I'm Kristen Ashley. She's Elizabeth Sedith. But we do tweet out information and try to engage conversation as well. We have our cards right here if you would like to email or call us. We do hope to be on the road a little bit more. We both started. I started in November. She started in February. We are new in the spring. But we're hoping to get in the road and get out and do more of these types of trainings. So we will keep you informed. Let us know what we can do to help you. Come get your CEUs if you need them. Thanks. Thank you.
If you need CEUs, the sign-in sheet is up here.
Where is the presentation? Because when I look up in the able to find the link this time.
Either I do need it really bad.
Oh, the earlier one? What time was the earlier one?
Or you can search by your name.
Thank you.
Or the earlier one was at 9.
See this
Sorry, we should have didn't even think about this. This is the extra one.
It's okay.
It was great. Thank you.
Oh, we're supposed to go now.
Yeah, she could be.
That's what our liar. And I know, like, I think it's for the counselor.
Oh, hours?
I'm not talking about, for 8-year-old.
Love you, see ya.
Opportunity to.
Yeah. And the literature and books, there's so much work around that literature. And like
I know.
I agree, yes. I'm so glad you came. So glad you came. There's a lot you can do with trauma in there. You don't need to. Are you an LPC, LMFT? If you don't, you're good. Did you get the wrong one? Yeah. You got it.
Are you talked out yet?
A little bit.
Somebody, I signed it.